All right, so today I wanted to talk about something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, which is, do guitar players these days still need to really be buying tube amps in 2023? So I'm a 26-year-old guitar player. I grew up in a generation that kind of was on the cusp of switching from tube amps over to all-in-one modeling processors with stuff like the Kemper and the Quad Cortex. But I remember when I first started playing guitar, having a tube amp was like the end-all be-all. Whether it was a Blues Junior, a Marshall, a Vox AC15, whatever it was, it had to have tubes in it. Otherwise, it just wasn't cool. And I had, a little Marshall 10 watt whatever amp when I first started playing guitar. And I remember when I was about 13 or 14 years old, I got my first tube amp, which was this guy, which is a Tweed Deluxe or a Tweed 5E3 circuit. That was actually a kit build I built with my grandfather in 2011. And I was thrilled. It felt like everything I'd ever wanted. It was easy, it was simple, it had a couple knobs. I would run a couple pedals through it, a Boss Blues driver, stuff like that. And it was great. And I used this amp for years up until quite literally last year. It actually broke on me, and I need to get it fixed. But it was great, super reliable, and I've used it for 90% of my gigs that I've used with the tube amp. But as years went on, I would do shows with my boutique, big crazy pedal boards. Especially if you're in the worship scene, like we would all have the Pedal Train PT Pro board, just loaded up with every pedal possible. And as I started gigging more, for lack of a better term, kind of got a little lazy. I was tired of carrying this like big board and this big case to go play a show where most of the time I was just using a little bit of overdrive and a little bit of reverb, to where I started paring down my board more and more till it was smaller and smaller till it was a pretty compact board on just a PT Junior. And then one of my buddies got a Kemper. A lot of the guitar players that I liked started switching to Kemper, and so I ended up biting the bullet and I got the Kemper toaster and the remote, and I sold my pedals and everything because I could not afford to just buy it outright back then, and I used that for a really long time. I used whether it was with a controller, I would use a combination. Sometimes I'd have a little pedal board with the controller, and I used that up until 2020. When I actually had to sell my Kemper because the world had shut down. I had lost all my work as a musician. I had just moved to LA and I wanted to stay in LA, and that meant another month of living in LA. And I discovered Neural DSP. And started using plugins for all of my content. I started with the Plini plugin. And then Corey Wong came out with his plugin, and I started using that for different sessions, for YouTube content, for Instagram content. It was fast, it was easy, and it was reliable. And so now we're at the point where we have stuff like the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. The Helix is still going super strong, and it's having some of its best patch updates in its entire history. And that unit is 7-8 years old at this point. Of course, you still have people who are tried, true, and faithful to their Kempers because those are still great units that work really well in today's day and age still, especially with their new liquid profiling and stuff. You have Fractal. There's a plethora of different ways to get really, really great guitar tones out of these units that aren't tube driven, you don't have to do as much maintenance on them. You don't have to worry about switching tubes. You don't have to lug around an amp. You can have your entire rig now in a backpack or a case or a pedal board or whatever else very easily and get very good tones out of it. So with all these units out there now, what does that look like? Well, I'm someone, like I said, I grew up in kind of that transition period where I wanted tube amps as a kid, but being at that age, I would see guys like Pete Thorne or Tim Pierce where they had all these, amp heads and cabinets and everything else, like where they kind of had them at their disposal over their career. That's not as easily accessible these days anymore, not only because vintage prices fluctuate like crazy, and you have to be really careful with what you buy. And even, tube amps in general are just pretty expensive. Like the cheapest tube amp is probably, $500 for, I'd assume, a Blues Junior or something in that kind of category. And so you have all these guitar players who have these kind of tube amps and everything that grew up buying them. So now there's this next generation where your kind of two options are you can spend the thousands of dollars for these amps, whether you want to get, just a standard Vox AC30 or go with something like a Matchless or whatever else in the more boutique category, and that's your kind of Vox tone, your British tone. Then you have to get a deluxe reverb, you have to get, a Marshall, whatever else, right, to get these different sounds and tones. Or you can have a smaller unit that does it all for you for a significantly less cost, as well as something that also does different effects, overdrives, distortions, delays, reverbs, modulations. And while for me, I do still think tube amps do hold great value, there is still something to be said about the kind of natural sound and feel you do get from a tube amp. I just played a gig with a little Princeton reverb amp made by Third Power Amps about a week and a half ago. And I'll be honest, I kind of missed it. I went to the rehearsal. It was the first time I've used a amp and a pedal board with a gig in a long time. And I was like, there is something to this. So I do think it's still worth at least having a tube amp that you like for those purposes. But it is hard to argue with all the options and versatility you're getting from these units in a wide ranging, a wide array of price points. There's kind of something for everyone out there. You have the HX Stomp series, if you are still someone who likes natural pedals and pedal boards. You have guys implementing a quad cortex into their full pedal board rig and everything, or even people with helixes who have a couple of their favorite outboard effects run through the effects loops. There's even more units always coming out, which one that I actually just switched to recently, which is this guy, the Tonex by AK Multimedia, or Amplitude. And this basically, for me, really changed the game. Because I did the all-in-one thing for a while, and I kind of recently switched back to pedals after having some issues and with some of the units that I've used. And so I picked this up. If you don't know what this is, it's basically just an amp modeler in a box. You have 3 presets, and each preset is an amp. You have multiple banks as well. I don't know the exact number. I'll throw it up on the screen. But you can put in any amp in here. You can capture your favorite amp tones if you have tube amps at home that you want to capture in here, or you can just modify a lot of the stock presets. That's what I've been doing. Is there's a 65 deluxe reverb in here. That's the amp that I like. I'm a very simple guitar player. I don't need to switch amp settings for every song. But there's now stuff like this coming out where it's just a really good straight up amp modeler that you can use in combination with your effects pedals that you already have, or use it as a recording rig or whatever else. Just a lot, I've taken this to sessions and just used this, where I'll just throw this in my backpack or my, my gig bag, just plug it right in, dial up a good amp tone with a bit of reverb and compression, and you're good to go. And so, yeah, let me know what you guys think, because this is something that I've been thinking on a lot recently, where tube amps really have disappeared in a lot of aspects. It's very rare to see someone on stage, at least in kind of a bigger setting, using an actual mic'd up tube amp. And even for me, a lot of like the local shows I'll do around town, I'll bring this, or I'll use a Kemper and I'll go direct out to the monitors because it's just easier to use and easier to set up. And so, yeah, anyways, that was just something I wanted to talk about a bit today. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. It's definitely an interesting discussion, and I wonder if we're going to see maybe some kind of tube hybrid amp that really sticks. There's been a lot of tube hybrid stuff over the years that's just kind of fallen by the wayside, or what the next big thing for guitar amplification, or modeling is going to be. Like, what do you guys think that is? So for me right now, I've done the Kemper thing, the Helix thing. Right now I'm trying this guy out. I've used plugins. And it really is objectively a great time to be a guitar player because there are just countless ways and countless affordable ways to get really great professional guitar playing tone. But for you, will that be able to fully replace the sound and feel of something like a vintage Marshall or an original Fender Deluxe Reverb or a Twin? So yeah, anyways, hope you guys like this video. Just wanted to come in and talk about this because it's something I've been interested in. Let me know what you guys think, and as always, please like and subscribe.